Thank you very much. Right, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to item 10, which is, of course, the item of the day, the mayoral proposal. So, without further ado, I will hand over to His Worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora koutou, tēnei te mihi nui kia koutou. And I hope that this item goes as quickly as the last two, but I don't expect it to. Look, first of all, I want to acknowledge thanks, and actually my thanks go to everybody around this table, whether you agree with everything in this budget or you don't. It goes to our members of the IMSB and it goes to our local board chairs, because the figure that we heard earlier, 77 hours of workshopping what has led to this proposal. That is a huge amount of time, and add to that probably even longer when we did the emergency budget, because this is in effect for the first 3 years an extension of the emergency budget. What that demonstrates is that the decisions, although you don't make decisions in workshops, but the point of view that we've come to was not taken lightly. It's something that we've canvassed the options. I want to acknowledge staff because they put hours and hours of work. I'm incredibly impressed with our staff and the commitment they show on every budget and every long-term plan. Absolutely impressed with the competency, the professionalism and the manner in which they provide us with that advice. So Kevin, to you and your team, Ross and everybody else on that team, a big thank you from not just me actually, I think everybody around this table that would want to acknowledge that. It seems that we're only a couple of months ago that we passed our emergency budget in face of the biggest hit to income that Auckland Council has faced during its existence. And I spoke before about the irony that Council has over years, and before I arrived here, sought to diversify our source of income so that we don't put the burden entirely on rates. And succeeded remarkably well in that, 64% of our income was coming from non-rate income. And the irony is that if we'd just relied on rates, our income wouldn't have changed. The fact that we relied on so many other things, including, the big investment we make that we've got in the airport and the ports, generally that would bring in $110 million a year. This year it won't bring in anything, and next year, and possibly the year after. And that has hammered us. And if I went back to that earlier debate about what is the point of having assets, well, when you've got assets that return over $110 million a year, that's the equivalent of a 9 or 10% rate increase. So those assets have been valuable to us in giving us income to do what we need to do without putting further pressure on our ratepayers. The impact of COVID-19 wasn't expected, and its impact on our finances and many others in the community was clearly beyond our control. Having said that, it's our responsibility as councillors to get on and deal with that impact in the most effective way we can on behalf of all of our community. What it means, however, is that the plans that I was promoting at the start of the year, I remember the Auckland project that the New Zealand Herald had convened, and the plans that we had for, aggressively moving forward on infrastructure, for housing, for transport, for environmental sustainability, what we actually achieved in the last long-term plan, those plans took a hit, and some of those plans we have had to delay, and the emphasis is on delay. We haven't given up on those plans. However, I believe that what we have achieved in this mayoral proposal is that despite that revenue loss, we will make a huge step forward for our city with these proposals. And I want to outline what some of those really significant outcomes will be. Somebody said, is this an austerity budget? Well, austerity budget means that you slash your budget and you have less to spend. In fact, on capital investment, we will in the next 10 years, we've budgeted to spend $31 billion, up from $26 billion last time. That is a 19% increase in our capital investment in infrastructure in just 3 years. and that is something that will make a difference to our city. But most importantly is what's happening in the next 3 years. Because when we first sat down and looked at this budget, we believed that we would, absent other measures, have to make some big cuts in the investment plans that were already in place. And we heard from people like Auckland Transport that if we had have chosen to take that path, and I'm grateful for the fact that we haven't, that would have disrupted the whole pipeline of capital works. It would have cost tens of millions more by the time we got back to them, but it wouldn't have just delayed it for a year or 2 years. When you close something down and have to start it up again, it delays it for years and years. And clearly, that is not a sensible way to go. So what we've been able to do in this proposal is to put $900 million back into capital investment that we thought at the beginning we wouldn't have to spend in this area. And that's $550 million for transport, $145 million to water care, $54 million to stormwater, $65 million to community facilities. That's really important. Equally important is the question of renewals. And I've heard many councillors around the table, quite rightly, highlight the problem that whenever you've got a budgetary problem, you cut renewals. And that was one of the options that we faced as well. What we heard from yesterday from our council officers who spent many hours doing the analytical work on this and working collectively with each of our council-controlled organisations, and I'll quote, was that they believe that this proposal provides sufficient investment capacity to meet all critical services delivery criteria. And they set that out: health and safety, contractual, legal, critical renewals, and publicly acceptable levels of service. Of course, that doesn't mean we'll do all the renewals that we need to do and that we want to do, but it means that we will do the critical work to make sure that we can move ahead and safely provide assets for our community to use. Auckland Transport came before this committee and said that what it means for them is that they, in the next 3 years, will lift their renewal budget from around $160 million to almost double that, $309 million, over about a 3-year period. And those renewals are critically important, and we enable those things to happen. Watercare has told us they'll be able to do more about ageing pipelines. Some of our city is more than a century old, and they can work on that to stop the leakages that we really can't afford to have happen when we are facing water shortages with weather and climate change. More community facilities can be upgraded, and we heard from Auckland Unlimited that this would enable them to do the work necessary to protect Auckland Art Gallery's heritage building. And that's got to be one of our most beautiful buildings in the city, and that was important. We can't do everything, but this budget enables us to do much more. The third thing that I want to talk to, firstly, that we've got a huge amount of extra money for investment in infrastructure. Secondly, that we are able to bring that forward into the first 3 years. But the third thing is the issue of climate change. Right now, we're absolutely focused on COVID-19 and the challenge that it presents to us, and appropriately so. But long after COVID-19 has been dealt with, we will face the ongoing challenge of climate change and the impact that that will have on our city and its people and our country economically and environmentally. Last year, we declared a climate emergency, and we did that unanimously. Every member around this table voted for it. And we set out in plans and preserved in the emergency budget plans to cut the council's emissions by 20% in the next few years. And I'm pleased that we were able to preserve that under incredible pressure. In this budget, we continue that work. And this budget sets aside in addition to the money that we'd normally be spending in this area on coastal protection and on big things like making sure that we have a quality compact urban form, that we work to achieve mode change by strengthening public transport, strengthening walking and cycling, we put another $150 million, and that will achieve some things that are really worthwhile. From the time this budget passes in June next year, we will cease to purchase any new diesel bus. All new buses will be electric or hydrogen. With the government assistance promised in the campaign, we'll be aiming at 50% of our bus fleet being non-carbon emitting by 2030. We'll aim to remediate Queen Street Valley, the area with the worst black carbon pollution anywhere in the country, and to make our city centre carbon zero. Adding to the mayoral proposal of the 1.5 million trees a year that we're planting, we'll plant over the 10-year period a further 2 million native trees, including street trees. We'll increase our resource recovery centres. We'll make council facilities more energy efficient, including using solar panels, and we'll increase our planning to manage coastal change and water sea level rises. They're all steps in the right direction. Are they enough? They're never enough. But we will also, in a critically important way, be looking for partnerships to work with government and businesses that actually have big levers to influence the level of carbon emissions. We'll be acting as a strong advocate in those directions, and we'll be looking to work alongside our young people and our mana whenua to make more progress. So despite the economic crisis caused by COVID-19, we'll do all of the things that I've outlined earlier and that are set out in this budget to make Tamaki Makaurau a better, world-class, inclusive and sustainable place to live. Finally, in achieving this, without putting unreasonable pressures on Aucklanders who fund what we do through their rates, we've taken, I believe, a prudent and a balanced approach to our finances, using all the levers that are available to us. And just to recap, you're familiar with all of those levers. We'll continue to promote value for money and savings, and we'll make 90 million of the 120 million of the savings in this year's emergency budget permanent. We will continue to sell surplus properties and look at other propositions such as leasing car parks to raise 70 million a year for each of the next 3 years. We will lift for a period of time our debt to revenue ratio from 270 to 290%, which, having had discussions with credit rating agencies, we believe will be regarded as prudent in the circumstances and will not affect our credit rating. We will maintain our 3.5% a year rates increase on over the 10-year period, but for next year, there will be a one-off 5% rate increase. What does that mean for our average residential ratepayers? It means an additional $38 a year rates on $1 million property, taking the annual increase in rates, including the differential reduction between businesses and residents, to $147 increase for the year. It's likely that our rate increase will be at or below that of comparable cities in New Zealand, and I'm talking about metropolitan and high growth cities such as Hamilton, Tauranga and Wellington. It will certainly be nowhere near the vicinity of what was initially proposed for Wellington of a 23% rate increase. Madam Chair, this hasn't been an easy budget to put together for you, for me or for any of us, but I believe that we've struck a reasonable balance between what we as a city need to do on behalf of our residents and the affordability to those same residents. I commend this proposal to you. It's a proposal to go out to public submission for submissions, and following that consultation, we will consider any further amendments that may be necessary to this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I know that we have workshopped this, but I'm going to offer now. Someone's whispering. Questions? Comments? Councillor Casey.
I'd like to go first to hopefully set the tone.
You did last time.
And Pippa and I have got a $100 bet. We're out of here by noon, so this is going to be real short. This isn't the Mayor's proposal. It's not. It's ours. I've put 3 days and a bit of my life into this proposal, and so have you all. And so have many of the local board chairs, and God knows how many hours Phil, Bill and Desley have put in. I don't even want to think of it. As for our staff, like Ross and Kylie, I think they've been sleeping with it. So my life is in this. Paragraph 7, what does it says? This is the toughest budget in the life of Auckland Council. No, it's not. This is the toughest budget I have ever been part of, and I've been a councillor for 27 years. That's 3 councils, 6 mayors, 9 terms, 27 years, 9 long-term plans. And do you know what's different about this one? There is no joy in it. But what there is for me, a huge sense of relief. Because at the beginning of this project, I think most of us in this room thought, how on earth are we going to get to the end? How are we going to keep Auckland moving, keep the services, keep the buildings open, keep the services that people so rightly value, keep them operating? And we've done it. And guess what? While the rest of local government in New Zealand is, to quote some journalists, in disarray, and the Mayor spoke yesterday about the various councils having commissioners and falling out with each other. Absolutely, we have differences. But we are absolutely, I think, hopefully unanimously behind this proposal. How could you not be? Because this is the proposal that's keeping Auckland living into the future. This is it. We've saved, I do think that. I think we have saved, the council has saved the services that people desire. And Chris, yeah, the strategic assets, you know, we'll always have a difference about that, but we're still talking to each other. There has been no blood on the floor. Well, maybe just a tiny trickle the other day, which I apologise for. But you know, this is amazing. This is. I want to congratulate. You know, of course we're congratulating the staff and the chair and the mayor, but I want to congratulate all my colleagues for getting us through to the end of this. And that's why I think we'll be finished by 12 o'clock. Because after that, there's no more to be said. We just vote it through and go home.
Thank you to Councillor. Councillor Fletcher. I want to know who's got the $100 on the floor. Don't say, or that might influence the questions and the comments. Councillor Fletcher.
Madam Chair, I don't want to speak at this time. I just want a quick question, if I may, to the Mayor. And it may be that we deal with it further into the agenda, but on that decision to consult on the targeted accommodation rate, does that mean that we are going to continue any advocacy to Wellington on the need for a bed tax? Where does that leave us on that issue?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, we are consulting on a proposal that says that while the accommodation provider targeted rate comes into effect 12 months effectively after COVID-19 struck, we need the flexibility to be able to continue to suspend that if the circumstances make it unreasonable to reimpose it. But on your specific question, from day one, I've said that a simpler, easier to administer and more equitable system would be a bed tax. But we have no power to impose a bed tax, which is why we impose an accommodation provider targeted rate based on capital value. A bed tax is simple. It's X dollars a night for each visitor that comes through the door. So it's not a case of affordability. The government has deemed it appropriate to allow a local bill to go through Parliament to allow Queenstown to do that. Actually, there's 100 times more, 1,000 times probably more tourist workers in this city than there are in Queenstown. And what's good for Queenstown, I think, would be equally good for Auckland. I've talked to a number of big hotels, and they believe that the bed tax would be the right way to go. I've put that in the briefing for the incoming ministers to have a look at. I have raised it already with the Minister of Tourism. He'd barely got his feet under the desk, and I thought he needs to know this. And I think if collectively we continue to work for that and work across all of the political parties in Parliament to say this is what we need, because this money that is raised in this way is what enables us to market our city and our country, rather than putting it on a rate on everybody, including people that don't get any benefit. You know, previously, general ratepayers paid to market tourism. We need to do it, but those that benefit from it should pay. And if it's a bed tax, it's actually paid by the visitor themselves. So it all makes sense, and I'll continue to push for it.
I'm pleased to hear that, because I have long believed a bed tax is the better way to go. And right now, with the numbers of people quarantining in Auckland, it would have been a great source of revenue coming from the government, actually.
Great source of revenue for us. The government will be paying for it because they're paying for the quarantine. I probably won't say that in my submissions to the government.
No, I think not. But I just want the assurance that you are doing everything that is possible, even to the point of persuading local members of Parliament to actually look at it as bills that they might sponsor on our behalf, where the legislation has already been in place. But I'd like to come back, Madam Chair, and speak to this a little later on, but to foreshadow my strong support for the initiatives that you've actually put in and around climate change, but there are other matters that I'd like to come back to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Actually, I have no one else wanting to speak so far. Yes, I have Deputy Chair.
I suspect he's the one that's in receipt of the $100 bet. He'll drag this out.
No, I've got it all. I've got a few notes here. I'm sorry, guys. Look, I want to briefly thank the Chair, thank the finance staff as well, who I know worked incredibly hard on this, sometimes all the way into the night. You know, I drive down the motorway very late at night, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and I see the lights still on up in Auckland Council Tower, and I think that's probably the finance team working away. So well done, team. And I also want to thank the Mayor for this proposal, and I want to thank you particularly for, if I may say, your tenacity and your bravery to put this out to the public. I think that it really speaks to the value that you place on public services for the city, and I want to thank you for that. You know, I've just gone past my first year here, and when you start here you want to get in and change the world, right? And it always strikes me, I come from Auckland House on Albert Street, and I always walk past Mayor Robbie. Right, and I remember these conversations all through my life at the kitchen tables in various places where people say, if only they'd listened to Mayor Robbie on the rapid rail, if only they hadn't ripped up the trams, if only, if only, if only, if only, if only. No one has ever asked me what Mayor Robbie's rates rises were. No one's ever asked me that. I like to think that this council is learning the lesson actually that we should be thinking of that lesson and actually investing in our public services that people rely on and that actually our most vulnerable citizens rely on the most. You know, from a Waitakere perspective, we're sick and tired of underinvestment. That's what I hear all over the place. And we've inherited in the super city underinvestment in many areas. And I'm hoping that this proposal will go towards that, and actually it will invest in our critical infrastructure that we desperately need, so I'm very happy about that. But it is also a strong compromise. I think it's a roadmap for our future where individually all across this table we might have drawn the lines differently at various points. But we've come to a solution, I think, that we can all, most of us can accept, and hopefully we can all accept. Just before I leave, and I'm sorry about the 12 o'clock target, my favourite bit is about climate change. I really must talk about this because it's really fantastic. The Queen Street Valley is the worst black carbon in New Zealand, and actually that's all of our wards that share that responsibility because we all go down there for work. We all go down there to go out and go to restaurants and whatnot. And so I want to just briefly apologise to the residents and businesses down there that we didn't take action sooner. And this proposal, I think, will show us that we're planning to put that right. It will plant more trees and forests, and I hope we make a big deal of this in the public, because it really is time to reinvest in the south and in the west, which have shameful levels of tree canopy, and that affects air quality and quality of life. We may be building another Queen Street Valley in the south as well, and we've got to get to that before we get to that point. I hugely support plans to help Aucklanders help themselves on their climate change emissions, because after all, we're all in this together. I want us to redouble our efforts, and we should be looking at all the ways that we can do this through the term, and remember our kids and our grandkids and do as much as we can. Just to wrap up, this won't be our last difficult discussion, and it probably won't be our last difficult discussion in this term, hopefully this year. But this proposal, and I commend this proposal. I look forward to going to the Waitakere residents and the Auckland residents with this proposal and hearing from what people have to say, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Councillor Dalton, did you have a comment?
Yeah, a comment. That's a hard act to follow. Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Simpson, while we're in finance, I just wanted to thank you for your leadership of the Team Auckland approach. You brought along the local board chairs and with them their boards, but also the CCOs, and I've really appreciated the opportunity for them to receive their advice and their collaboration. So thank you for your leadership on that. Just briefly, in terms of the Mayor's proposal, I too thank you, Your Worship, for getting that balance. I know you really tried hard, and it's not going to please everybody, but it's good. The one area that I still have uncertainty over is the savings, and the savings in terms of the impact on our people. I still don't know what the savings are. I have had some advice from finance and I know a little bit more, but I just want us to be cognizant of that as we work through the year. There will be movement. The revenue may continue to increase. We don't know. We don't know if we'll have another lockdown, but may we please be cognizant of the impact on the staff as we go through the continued savings and continue to lock in the 90 million as we work towards the 120 million this year. And although it's very much operational, we have a responsibility as governors to take care of our people. And so I look forward to receiving some more information, and perhaps we can continue to decision make over the next year, as you've alluded to, Chair, as we look at how things are looking as we get into this next financial year. But thank you. Thank you to all of my colleagues too. It's been a ride.
Madam Chair, I think I'm right in believing that it's Councillor Dalton's birthday today. So I'd like, on behalf of everybody, to wish her a happy birthday.
I didn't know that. Happy birthday. We should have done that at the beginning. You should have told me that. Never mind. I would have sung, but I've got very little voice, which I'm looking after, so I'll sing another time for you. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to echo the sentiments acknowledging you and also the officers, and also to acknowledge the Mayor and the Mayor's staff and his office for the work that has gone into this proposal. It has been a very comprehensive exercise, and I know how difficult it must be for the Mayor to try and knit together a narrative of a plan that can get wide buy-in, and that would not be easy. But I do want to say that this is the Mayor's proposal, and the Mayor is entitled to that proposal. I think that the proposal reflects significant concessions by the Mayor on issues that the Mayor has felt strongly about and has campaigned on, but particularly around the rates. That is, there's no doubt that some tough decisions have had to be posed here this year as a continuation of the effects of COVID. That would not be easy. I mean, I'll be voting for the Mayor's proposal because it does deserve endorsement. There are some areas where I'm not wholly persuaded. Unsurprisingly, I'm not totally convinced on where we're at in terms of renewals, because I think we have a long way to go before we fully understand the state of our assets and the program of funding that's required to maintain and to renew those valuable assets for our community. Similarly, like Councillor Dalton, I'm not sure in relation to the effects of the efficiency savings that we will require. But also I remain really concerned about where we are on debt and the need to get headroom as quickly as possible. I believe that the Mayor shares my concern about that, to build resilience into our budget, and also to ensure that we have the argument to fund growth-related infrastructure, because I do want to have another look at the development contributions policy, because we have to ensure that those interests that trigger growth are paying for it, and that is something that we will have to revisit, I am sure. I note that the Rodney Local Board mooted the option of a consultation on a rates rise of 8%. I don't favour that, but it's important for historic record to say that if the numbers were around here and the numbers are not here, I understand that. I would support a consultation for an increase in the general rate by 7%, not 5%. And it's important that I say that, because I don't mind being held to account for my position on this particular matter. But since the numbers aren't there, I accept that. I do have to say that later in the day, I would expect an amendment on the water quality target rate, which I am happy to second for consultation, but that should be over and above the proposal here, because this is the Mayor's proposal, and what we consult over and above that we can debate at a later item. But I do want to acknowledge Your Worship, your proposal. I think it is the product of a lot of discussion and quite a strong level of compromise, and I think it will be interesting to see what the public's view on the particular items are, and I hope that we will be able to debate further changes later next year.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Coombe.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair, e te koromātua, tēnā koe, tēnā koutou e aku rangatira, ngā mihi nui kia koutou e te kaupapa e tēnei wā. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I would like to speak in support of the mayoral proposal going out for consultation. I really commend Madam Chair, the Mayor, colleagues for the process that we have been through in terms of the consensus building around the table, and it's and the free and frank discussions that we have been able to have as a group. And I think it's been a really grown-up discussion, particularly around what the function and activities of council are, and also about a realistic rates rise. I think as we saw through the COVID response, the role of council in meeting the community's four well-beings is really fundamental. And we often have a lot of debate about council sticking to core services or sticking to our knitting, but actually we have a role that's far broader and far more meaningful to the community. And I think we've been able to have a really good and thorough discussion about that has brought us to this point in terms of getting behind the Mayor and his proposal. So thank you. I did just want to speak particularly about the proposed investment for climate action, which of course, as Deputy Chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, I'm just absolutely delighted that we have that package in there. Yesterday, Te Taruki a Tawhiri, Auckland's climate plan went online. It's now available for everyone to be able to read and access, and we had a really good panel discussion last night with Chair Richard on the panel. And so many questions there being asked about, well, what is council doing? We've declared the climate emergency. What are we actually doing to meet our emissions target of 50% by 2030? And I think this lays a really strong foundation. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for including that in funding from the rates rise. It is only a starting point, and I think we're going to have a big job in getting that message across, because there are going to be much bigger decisions that we're going to have to make in terms of what we reprioritise and where we're going to put our investment and funding, and big decisions that we're going to have to make as a city about how we grow and develop over the next 10 years. So this is just a starting point, but I think what's key to the plan that came through last night is that this is about all of our well-being. It's about the place, people and nature. And if we deliver on our plan, we will have fantastic benefits for the community, across the community, but also for our environment, and it puts the environment first. I just wanted to make a comment too in thanking staff that there is a very lazy narrative about what council does and those who work for us, and really put service of Auckland ahead of high salaries, who are really committed to delivering for Auckland. And it's really essential that we acknowledge the work that our staff does. And I understand that there were still reports flying around at 4:30 this morning. I'm a bit concerned to hear that. But there's a huge amount of pressure for our staff to deliver, and often get put in the limelight in ways that they shouldn't. So I did just want to sum up just by thanking everybody who has worked on this proposal. Sorry, Councillor Alf, you're just throwing me off when I'm trying to just say something really meaningful about the Mayor's proposal. Okay, if I just get back to my flow. Where was I? So I just, absolutely support this going out for consultation and all the proposals that are in it. Thank everybody who's been involved, and I hope that in terms of when we get to the consultation documents and the way that we sell this, we do have a hard message to get across to Aucklanders about the vital role that council plays, the services that we're delivering, the activities, the role that we play, and what rates pay for, and that they pay for. They're not a service charge, as I saw has already been reported in the media. They are a tax, and we need to acknowledge that we get a huge amount from relatively very low rates, and historically very, very, very low rates, and we need to be realistic about what we're funding and how we fund it. And there is a role there for, this is about collective action across Auckland when it comes to our climate plan and delivering on that, and also the role of government. So there's still a lot more that we need to work on, but I think this is a really great starting point to go out for consultation with Aucklanders. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Madam Chair. I commend the recommendations to colleagues. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and acknowledgements to you for the way you brought this through. You talked about the council family, and that's most important, so thank you. Very briefly, I just want to say this is the start of the process. We have to now go out and talk with our communities. That's what consultation is about. We tell them the accurate messages that you're hearing today, the realities, not some of the misinformed benchmarking of comparing Auckland to Balclutha or Cromwell, because that's just a nonsense. Service provision, as Councillor Coombs says, is a critical part of what we do. Looking after our communities is a critical part. Picking up the rubbish, supplying the regional parks, the local parks, the sports fields. Turning the tap on, the water runs, flush the loo and what's there goes away. Looking after our environment. Having good and growing PT. It's not perfect by any means, but it's growing. And with this budget, it can continue to grow. To improve stormwater, and to give us true resilience in our articulated water over time. But we have to work with our communities. We have to tell them the true story of what Auckland's delivered on this LTP, on an LTP's past, and the opportunities for the future. And then we have to actually look at, between now and July or June next year, we have to look at the budgets compared to actuals, Madam Chair, because that's going to be the interesting part. What does the COVID impacts delve to us in the next 5 months, 6 months? Is it going to be dire, as some are predicting, or is it going to be a good solid bounce back to where we would like to be? And that, Madam Chair, is the next piece of work, and probably the most important piece of work. And we'll have to keep informing our public, our shareholders, on exactly what is the reality and not the myth. So thank you, well done to everybody. Well done, boss.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Hills.
Kia ora, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both you and the Mayor for leading this process again. This has obviously been a terrible year for our community and our country, each other and our own whānau. You know, we've all been under massive stress, and especially want to put it out there to our staff. And I know that people don't like the backslapping and the thank yous, but actually the staff are just under so much pressure, but still come here with a smile and still come here and do so much work for us based on our decisions, and often get, as we know, a lot of abuse and a lot of nastiness out there, but also we just know with the redundancies and the cuts and the changes from COVID have been hugely impactful in a negative way to many of our team out there. So I guess that's what brings us to this budget and what we need to do. You know, and I do think back to what we relied on for our services. Our library staff during COVID were out calling older people in our community. We had teams of people volunteering to pack food for the city mission. We had our community facility staff out there at the time felt like risking their lives to close toilets and clean toilets and help our bus drivers and train drivers and ferry staff all doing that job to keep Tāmaki running while we were in the middle of a pandemic. And it's shown also what has happened when we've sort of had the 60% of our income not from rates, and we've protected what we thought we were doing the right thing, but it's shown what happens when the tide goes out. The tide went out on a lot of that income, and it showed quite quickly what we didn't have and what the options that we didn't have. So the other good things are we're investing, and I think a lot of people miss this when we talk about, oh, council's terrible debt, is we're investing over $1 billion more a year in capital than we were 5 years ago, or 5 or 6 years ago. You know, that's incredibly different when we're sitting at about the same rate revenue as we were 5 years ago. It hasn't changed that much compared to what we're actually investing in. And people want us to do that. We know we've already had the complaints from people. I don't get complaints about rate rises barely at all. But what I do get complaints about is when services aren't there for people that they expect them to be. When things have to close, when parks aren't looking great, when toilets are left, you know, to rack and ruin, to what Councillor Newman has been going on for many years, well before COVID, around our renewals. It is seriously concerning what we keep delaying, even before COVID, that our city expects us to be responsible for and get done. So I do commend that this is getting us a little bit of the way there. You know, I think there is a conversation about how far we can really push that debt if it's for capital and for those renewals. You know, I think the conversation needs to continue because, you know, record low interest rates and we need to be investing. If we can invest more and borrow slightly more and mean it takes some of the heat off our households in the short term to make sure we're not leaving things up for 10 years down the track. So it's great that we're investing, you know, the mayoral proposal invests a whole lot more in renewals, and we need to do far more in the capital space. In the climate space, of course, that's not perfect either, but I've had pretty long conversations with as many of you as I could in the last couple months around what you expected. There's some people who think we're doing too much in this space. There are many of you who think we're doing not enough. It's the same with the public. I've had the feedback from the public that we shouldn't be doing any of this. It's not our role. And other people saying how maybe sad it is that we're not doing more. But what is in here is some big proposals that do move us forward. The bus changes themselves. We're at status quo, we sit at about 16 million. We're more than tripling that budget for ensuring we do not buy another diesel bus. We're going to keep buying diesel buses until 2025. We will now stop that as of the passing of this budget. I know it's going up for consultation, but it also purchases up to 600 buses, and that's what we can control. We can't control the fleet across New Zealand or Auckland. That's the government, and we've given that feedback time and time again that we need them to act on that. But the other projects in there, Urban Ngāhere, we passed that excitingly unanimously, but never funded it. We are now funding that. We're going to have 200 hectares more of native forest in our regional parks and rural areas. We're going to have 9 more recycling facilities. I'm already at 5 minutes, and apologies. There's a huge amount of positive things in here. It's still a tough budget, and this will be tough on households, but I know that most of the feedback I get from people is they want us to act, so we're not leaving it up to the next generation or the next long-term plan where we then have to put up rates 20 or 30% to cover the massive decisions we leave for someone else to do. So just want to thank you all, and I think it's not perfect, but it's definitely a good budget that we're putting out to the public for them to comment on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, my humble apologies to Pippa. Sorry for that interruption. It should not have happened, so I apologise for that. Hare huri tau ki a koe, Angela. Happy birthday to you. Chair, what I've asked His Worship the Mayor, plus also yourself, if you're okay, is to put those 3 words up there, because it is, no matter how we look at it, the mayoral proposal is a basis first for us. We will definitely have discussions to see whether there's any changes that we believe we should have before it goes out for consultation. On Tuesday, I had a discussion with Emma, and if people don't believe it's Emma, I've got her number in my phone, just in case you think I'm making it up. But she ended up saying to me that, why is the mayor pushing for 5%? And I said to her that his proposal is as per statute, and that we, as governing body, along with our local boards, will be making the decision. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Auckland Council, with our local boards and the governing body, will make that decision. And I said to her that this is not going to be the mayoral proposal. That's going to be our proposal that goes out to you. You need to be part of, have your say. I, again, as always, want to acknowledge the staff and just for their work. And I know it's been difficult. And lastly, I again want to acknowledge you, Chair. As Councillor Dalton said, your Team Auckland approach with local boards, I have no doubt at all that that will continue on post any of us being around this table. It will continue. I have no doubt at all that the importance of having our local boards around any discussion, especially with long-term plans. So definitely that will carry on. So again, I want to acknowledge yourself, Your Worship, in regards to working with all of us in regard to this. And again, apologies to you, Pippa. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. And first I want to acknowledge you, Mr Mayor, because when we said to you we think that the rate rise needed to be higher in the first year, you were worried, and I think you thought there wasn't enough support and you challenged us. And thank you for taking it on, because I think for all of us we were really worried about community facilities not being renewed when they needed it, and that bow wave of unattended to facilities. And so I think it is a brave move, and I commend you for that, but also my fellow councillors for being willing to get behind that. But I do, and I have had some concerns from the community. A man from Langholm rang me yesterday and said, I'm really worried that you're going to sell the toilets. He was, and so I do, caution community members from listening to everything they hear in the media, because who would want to buy a toilet? Seriously. There is no return on those. So I think the thing is that, that is our role, and those are the things that people worry about. When they get the bus from Langholm and they get up to Tarangi, and there's still not a toilet there, but it's being worked on. And that's a classic example. A toilet is being moved from one place to another because it needs to be in the right place. And so we can do that. We may do that. But it's about providing the right facilities in the right places. And so once I said to him, hey, look, we haven't adopted this yet. We want you to hear your views. And I think that's to echo Councillor Filipaina's comment there, that this is going out for public consultation. I really want to hear from the middle of February to the middle of March and in between, from whatever medium that we can arrange, and including us being called personally, to hear what people say, but also give us the chance to explain that. And I want to, as regional governors, go out to our consultations and not get bogged, there's the local component, but there's seriously some regional things that I want to hear back from people about. And I want us to take that opportunity as regional governors, that there's a balance of local and regional feedback and what's pushed out to our communities, so they don't miss the things that'll be in their rates by being distracted by, say, for example, a local issue. Those are important, but I don't want people to be blindsided and go, oh, I didn't realise that. So it's our job as a council to make sure that what's consulted on is balanced by both regional and local. And because it happens at a local level, that it's not just the local issues, because the regional issues will affect people's rates. So yeah, I'm reasonably satisfied that what's going out to the public is a really good basis for a long-term plan. And thank you, Madam Chair, for all the work you've done, and particularly our finance and performance staff, but also all the reports that fed into this from all of our parts of council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't be saying too much today because this is a proposal that's going out for consultation, so I hope to spend most of my time listening to what the public of Auckland have got to say. I think I at times must kind of live in a bit of a parallel universe to some of the other people around this table, because my experience of quite a diverse range of people in the ward that I represent is one different from what's being articulated by a number of councillors today, and it's one that has been affected by COVID-19. And I know that the Mayor made the very apt comment that the balance to be struck here is between what we need to do and what is affordable. And I think parts of Auckland and quite a number of our citizenry will have different views on what that balance is to strike. And I must say at the moment, I do have a bit of a concern in terms of the cumulative effect of a number of the costs that are incurring and that have been incurring even before COVID-19 goes. We've introduced targeted rates, albeit with pretty strong support. But I was at a function for commemorating Councillor Quack's the other day, and I remember one of the sayings he was prone to say, and that was that there was nothing more permanent than a temporary tax. And I can see that kind of sort of accumulation of costs to people starting to emerge. We'll have a regional fuel tax, and I'm a little disappointed that we haven't had a little bit more information over the last couple of years as to the inequitable impact of that tax on different parts of Auckland, which of course don't get factored in to these sorts of considerations because there's no figures actually being attributed to them. So that research commissioned by the RMSB showed that certain parts of Auckland were disproportionately hit and certain socio-economic groups, not least of which was the people at the bottom of the heap. So I'm looking at the way things are starting to accumulate here. If there are water rate increases, we have proposals later on in our paper for changes to the urban rating area, which have some pretty significant impacts for admittedly smaller numbers, but big rate increases. You start putting those all together and you add up with, a fairly significant increase across the board. I'm pretty sure the Auckland public will be doing some of those accountancy exercises themselves to see how that affects them. As far as some of the other aspects of the mayoral proposal as to do with asset sales go, they're almost been taken as a given, but they are a contribution that our public are making. They are, and again, in some areas more so than others. We already, disposed of our diversified assets portfolio in the last term, the so-called rainy day fund. That might have been quite useful now. I would have thought we have 240 million for this year in the emergency budget. We have 210 over the next 3 years. Some people would evidently like to go a lot further. I just wonder at which point you stop or there's not much left to dispose of. So I'm a little more cautious with the asset sales. I have supported them thus far because in the scheme of things they have been able to be done without relatively major impacts in communities. I'm not sure that will continue to be the case in the future. I hope in terms of the climate action that we do actually mobilise actions more so than perhaps endless sort of self-reflection there. So like Councillor Hill, I like to see things actually happening on the ground. I read an article this week where, one of the easiest ways to get immediate gains was to get people out of their cars, just to get people to stop driving their cars so much. So it doesn't always have to be big infusions of capital to have an effect. So I'd like us to have a far more stronger communicative function in that than we have done thus far, and to get some wins on the ground and to win people over, as indeed we're going to have to do with this emergency budget. It's been cast as one which is to keep Auckland moving. I'm a little bit more upbeat than most people. When I look around, I see lots of projects that are keeping Auckland moving. A number by ourselves, but a number of other ones by NZTA. No matter which part of Auckland I go to, I see massive big projects. 700 million Northern Motorway improvements, 400 million for Penlink starting next year, Puhoi to Warkworth, a series of big capital projects down south. So as much as our capital investment is going up again for 31 billion over the 10-year program, up from the 26.2 from the previous 10-year plan, I'm very much upbeat in terms of what's happening in Auckland as a consequence of both Auckland Council and the government, which I see increasingly coming to the party. So, Madam Chair, I've said a lot more than I said I was going to say. I commend the Mayor for coming up with this. I'm going to listen very carefully to what people say, and as I did last time, make my mind up on what Aucklanders say about this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Feature.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. This has been a really good debate, and it brings a lot of the last 10 years into sharp focus. We are the product of all of the decisions that have been made to date, and I think driving much of this budget is the decisions that we took on the unitary plan. The minute that we adopted the unitary plan, we consigned council to have to invest in that infrastructure on such a wide scale in Auckland. And in many ways, we've been grappling with that for a long time. So people like myself probably sound a bit niggly because over the last few years, I've turned down a lot of proposals I would have liked to have seen at a personal level because I knew that we had to prioritise. And like Councillor Newman, I knew that we were not effectively dealing with the renewals issue. And so in some ways, yes, we've got a COVID LTP, but in my opinion, much of what we are dealing with in this LTP was inevitable. It was going to happen with or without COVID. So the question for me in what we are looking at is the crisis has happened. Have we made the most out of using the crisis to secure our future effectively in the future? Lovely to hear the comments about the diversified assets being raided, the old Auckland Regional Services Trust, and that went in to the CRL. That went into climate change. The biggest thing there was getting the electric rail because we couldn't use diesel rail with the CRL. So progressively, one little step at a time, there are lots of collective decisions that are building up. But what is now apparent is that there is a much wider support across the populace for initiatives that took quite some courage in the past to do, but now people have a much clearer understanding of why we must do them. I am, and you heard me earlier today and expressing support for questions that were posed by Councillor Darby, I really do want to know that we are using our balance sheet effectively. And if I ask the question, it is not disrespect to our staff. Nobody could be a greater champion and enthusiast for Jim Staybeck joining this council. And I hope that he does bring a sharp focus to these issues. And nobody will be more pleased than myself, but that doesn't mean to say I'm going to let him off the hook from at least asking the questions. That is healthy. That is healthy debate. And it's that level of contestability that I think we should show the maturity that we can discuss. You know, at so many levels, there are really good things and things that I support here. Last week, some of us went down with Pippa Coombe and John and Wayne. We went down to Miranda and we looked at the targeted environmental rate and proudly were able to show the Waikato Regional Council what we had been able to do with our pest-free islands. Now, those of you that don't know me well know that the way to get to my heart is to actually do anything in the environmental space and on pest eradication and translocation programs. But I felt such immense pride when Liz Brooke presented that paper so effectively. I'm really sad that Gail Ogilvy's not still here because she did so much work in that space. But we've got and we've set a benchmark now for what could be adopted so that when we're talking about the Hauraki Gulf in the future, maybe we can get those synergies. But we've made some material difference. So, you know, at one level, the targeted environmental rate, I'm pleased that the Mayor has, unlike the COVID budget, the emergency budget, you know, he is responding, I think, favourably in terms of the debt limits, and I think we have to handle those prudently because we don't know what future shocks we might be able to have. But ultimately, the issue is how we manage change, how we take the public with us. I'm worried that we've gone a step too far. In terms of the community that I represent, and we all represent different communities, I think by going out with the 5%, it is going to be a step too far. It certainly is a step too far for me. I would have preferred a different configuration. I appreciate it's the Mayor's proposal. The Mayor will put it up in its entirety, and we can accept or reject it. Well, 5% for me is probably a step too far. I know that we've got to do more for all of the renewals and everything else that we've talked about in terms of the investment, but there may be other ways to do it. But I hope that we can come together on wider issues, increase the public transport again, get those revenues up, you know, do those things that we can collectively do. But I think we run the risk that we will alienate the public by going out with such a large increase in that first year. And for that reason, I can't support that segment of what the Mayor has proposed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair, and without too many backslaps, I do acknowledge the staff and the Mayor, councillors, IMSB members in the long and arduous process that we've all gone through. You know, when I think back when COVID sort of first hit, it was 2 days before the first lockdown, and I was in a pre-agenda meeting for a planning committee, and I actually said to the teams, you know, there's going to be an enormous opportunity here. This is going to be hurting, but there's going to be enormous opportunity. Get ready, you know, send everybody to R&D, because it's going to be a new world that comes out of this. And I wasn't being any great oracle. You could see a lot of commentators were discussing that same very thing. And so I guess when we came to the emergency budget, it was a react budget, and we were promised that this was going to be a response budget. But in my view, we haven't posed the right questions or commissioned the right work or been successful in articulating our own arguments. I haven't been strong enough to get us collectively in a position to delve into things that I thought should have been delved into. And I'm just making that point. And look, I will always say what I need to say in this place. It's me. I'm not an acolyte of any one of you, or you know, and I don't adhere to any of the party politics. But at the outset, I say to myself, this is a 10-year plan, and have we thrown the ball out into the future ambitiously and chased hard after it? Team New Zealand, it's theirs, it's not ours, but we could own that. And essentially, this is a recovery budget. It's not a COVID reset budget. Let's be very, very clear about that. And it, in fact, uses all the pre-COVID world thinking and the tools of the pre-COVID world to address a post-COVID world. And that post-COVID world is colliding with a climate world. So there is an enormous challenge there, and I'm not convinced that we've really grabbed the opportunity of the future. But look, we've got more work to do. I've outlined that the 3 work streams that I thought that really should have been undertaken and that weren't, in my view. And delving into that strategic response to COVID, which I've already introduced, is for me a real big gap. We did see some scenario planning, but it was dismissed pretty quickly, and we did not see the follow-up work. It wasn't allowed to come through. And I think that's a fundamental error in the building of this. The new revenues discussion didn't get out of the blocks. There was an email that went around, and then a summary email, and radio silence endured after that. And there's, you know, I have raised about airport and our port on the waterfront here, and I modified my position. I modified it, as I said earlier, to actually go into this inquiry as to what do these assets mean to us, you know? And look, I know that, you know, my previous position in elections was strategic assets off the table, taboo, don't go there. But I realised my own position was not informed. I never asked the question in my own mind as to why we had these assets. And so we're going to have to go back there and understand what they mean. They can't be just strategic assets in name only. There has to be some kind of underpinning blueprint, as I describes it, that demonstrates how that strategic asset fits into our organisation and how it is to be used or utilised. So going forward, you know, 30% of Aucklanders, I'm listening to RNZ recently, 2 days ago, they have today household incomes lower than pre-COVID income. So I'm sure that many Aucklanders will be asking why Auckland Council has $2.1 billion in the bank in airport shares. Now, I've heard some say it provides us with dividends. If your plan was to have a dividend stream out of the air, you would not put $2.1 billion in one asset. Now, any equities advisor is going to say you that is a really bad move. That puts you in a very vulnerable position because one asset can go backwards pretty quickly, and you're not. There's no insurance policy there by having other assets in your portfolio that may not go backwards to the same degree. So for me, that Ports of Auckland airport discussion, the vacuum there, no understanding of what strategic really means, that's a big gap. But on the bright side, Perseverance Furthers, a year ago, we were talking about another strategic asset, and it was shut out, and that was the Bledisloe. A few of us said, yep, we needed to put it into the discussion on the overstation development of Aotea, and it now is out there for consultation. But there are risks going forward, and I want to emphasise that the operation and renewals budgets are not adequate. But look, this is the cut. That will be highlighted when we get to consider ATAP and the RLTP. But I can tell you now, members, hold your horses, because this budget will not fund what you're anticipating. Will be funded in ATAP, that's the big buckets, and then flowing through to the RLTP. You won't get my Stanley Bay ferry service back, which is going to be cancelled in 2 weeks, one of the oldest ferry services in Auckland. You won't get a new ferry fleet, which is disintegrating and breaking down. My Lake Road might get up over the line because it's primarily RFT funded. You won't see any demonstrable change in cycling budgets. That won't show up. And I'm saying now, get ready for the rough road ahead. It's going to be tough. So we are going to have to look at some other levers that we've never considered in this budget setting, and we'll have to look at that going ahead. I'm not one for not backing a budget. I think it's pretty spineless to abstain on a budget like this. I say to myself, and I get the ting, and I'll be supporting this budget with all the aches that I see in it. But one thing I am looking for, the Chief Executive's not with us now, but going forward,
Yes, he is. He's waving his hand.
Sorry, obscured, Mr. Chief Executive. I think we do, at the end of this process, need to review the long-term plan process itself. Personally, greatest respect to all the people from finance, I think it's too financial-led, and it doesn't have enough strategic pull in it. And that would be my urge, but that will come out in a review of the long-term planning process. We've not undertaken that in all the LTPs, to my knowledge. I know there's always a little bit of a cursory review afterwards, but that would be my message to the Chief Executive, is to trigger a long-term plan review of process. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walker.
Just want to raise 2 or 3 concerns, Madam Chair, and I guess for me, one of the overriding concerns around what we go out with is the question, the test as to whether Aucklanders understand our position. And I would suggest that if you were to just interview a number of people on the street, that they really don't understand our situation. I think obviously we've had a hit from COVID, but the issues that we've been confronting around debt existed before then, and they're also going to exist into the future. So the concern I've got is that we need to tell our story. That is, what do we need to cover the cost of our expenses now? And essentially, much of that is around renewals. What do we need to fund into the future? That's around investment. And what are the looming problems that we've got? And yes, we've got a debt problem now, we've got a debt crisis, but looming in 2 or 3 years' time, we're going to have a revenue crisis when the CRL is up and running and various public transport initiatives are up and running, and we're going to have many, many more people using public transport, but we're not going to have the revenue to actually fund the subsidy for that amount of use. And I don't think that we are communicating that sufficiently now, because it may well be that that necessitates rate increases in the future. If not rate increases, then increases in fares, and if the increase in fares is unpalatable, the fallback is around rates, and the same thing applies to renewals. So I've got a real concern around that, and I think there's an overriding requirement for the Chief Executive to get the team to focus on those issues and focus on what we really need to be doing, and in my opinion, that's receiving more money from the government, particularly to fund the things that we're funding, like the CRL, which is essentially Kiwi Rail project, the $1 billion blowout in that. We haven't got that back. The funding that we put into the museum, which is a national taonga, stadiums, other transport projects, until those things are addressed, and the fundamental problem that rates aren't a great match for a number of our expenses, we've got a real problem, and it's not going to go away. Our situation gets progressively worse. So I hope that we can explain those stories. And then the other thing that concerns me generally, and it's picking up on Councillor Darby's and other issues, we need to take far more of a scenario-based approach to our long-term plan so that we present to people what we could and should be spending around climate change in order to meet targets that fundamentally we are not going to meet. And yes, we know that there are a number of policy interventions around government, but we're not going to be delivering there. So we need scenarios around that. And fundamentally, if we're not doing that, we're not presenting the choices to Aucklanders that they really need to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Member Taipri.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. Ko tēnei te mihi e te kora mātua e whiu, tēnā koe, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou e tēnei wā. So just in case everyone thought we might not say anything, we just think that first we want to acknowledge the unique position that the board has through legislation to participate in the Auckland Council at its finance performance meetings, along with the other meetings as voting members, where not everybody across Aotearoa has that opportunity through local government. We want to say that as we dust off the speech of 10 years, moving into the 11th year, acknowledging what everyone else has said, and we've said this many times, this is just the beginning. And really what it will come down to is this is a triennial thing where we review LTP. I think this is maybe the third or fourth, Kevin, you can remind me, but we've been through these. And what really happens now, of course, is what you all decide, and we all decide around May, I think it is, next year, normally May, June. And then what more importantly is reflected is what you actually put into your annual plan. I don't know how many times I might have heard the word reprioritisation over the years, or other things that have come out of the blue, but certainly this year has been one out of the bag for all of us to teach us how to avoid being reactive. And so I acknowledge Your Worship and the members for trying to take something to be proactive and take charge of the destiny of Tamaki Makaurau. So we look forward to what the people have to say. But we want you to make sure that when you do put this out and you do make your decisions, and in particular the things you would talk about with infrastructure, we have been seeking support for out west and out south for those who need the public transport, for those who need the infrastructure, and we request strongly that you put your money where your mouth is. And so again, we will support this to go out to the people. And we look forward to the people's reply. And then we look forward to the decision that you make upon the people's reply. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Mulholland, and welcome.
Kia ora, and thank you, and apologies as I have given for lateness. Your Worship, thank you for all the work that you and the team have done on this budget. I commend it going to the people of Tamaki Makaurau. May I acknowledge you, Madam Chair, and your Deputy for the work that you have done. It has been a tireless effort, and I want to thank you. Also to Team Auckland, that to me means all of us collectively the staff and the people that I'm very privileged to sit around this table with. So kia ora, and thank you for the opportunity to work alongside you. Well, I should thank the people of the FO for that. So we are a world-class city, and I was recently reading a document that talked about Aotearoa being recognised internationally as a world-class society. So my view on this budget is that we need to hear from the people who will be paying, whether it be through rates directly or as our residents, and other people who contribute towards Auckland, because we have two parts to our budget. I think we have to be really brave, and I love the idea of living in a world-class city, and whilst I will always believe in my roots, which are in Kirikiriroa and Hamilton, but I'm so proud of the city, and I actually think we could do more. So this budget outlines those opportunities. I am looking forward to hearing from the people about the borrowing. That's one of the things that I'm very interested in hearing about, because I have had some feedback already around being prudent, but let's wait and hear. I believe that we are incredibly focused as we move forward, and I think that COVID has added to that focus. So whilst over many, many years, other councillors and decision makers have taken us forward, this is the time, in my view, to really invest in infrastructure. I am incredibly keen to see improved infrastructure, and that aligns to me to the asset recycling, because you cannot hold pieces of land or property as they are now. You need to recycle it so you can look at other investment. And I do think it's incredibly important, and I've heard this a number of times around this table before today, about our contribution to renewals. That is another piece of critical work. So we wouldn't be able to do it without the funding and support of the people. So I'm very oriented towards, let's get some real views and opinions and move forward. And whilst this is, yes, triennial, and I do agree with Chair Tapiri that this will be reviewed, I do think this is a time when this particular council has to be brave with potential increases as we move forward. And finally, can I just acknowledge that this, to me, is not about a vote bite. This is about listening to the people, doing the best for the people, and taking that step forward to spend the money that we need to spend to have world-class infrastructure, to have easy access to water and services, that we need to have great facilities. And in some parts across Aotearoa, I hear they don't even have swimming pools. So if we want all these things, and we do for our people, then we're going to invest in it. And yes, Mayor, I do raise swimming pool. I wonder why. I think I was raising it for the foe, but that was subtle, but thanks for raising that. So it's a pleasure to work alongside the team, and I am waiting to hear from the people, and I certainly will be sharing those views and opinions. And kia ora tātou to everyone here, and let's hear from Tamaki Makaurau. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. I think most of it has actually all been said, and it is the toughest budget. I will be wanting to listen to the public when we go out to consultation, and that's why I will support this to go out to consultation. But I will be listening. I'm not saying that I'm going to be supporting it. I will be listening. And just picking up on the airport shares in the ports of Auckland, I think one of the things I think this council here has to remember that Manukau did come to the table, and Auckland Council, with the airport shares, and would be in a far worse place if we hadn't had those. With the airport and the ports of Auckland into the future, I'm sure things are going to improve. It might take a wee time. So I think we have to be very, very careful. Whatever we do, we can't just go selling everything. I think we have to be very mindful of it. If we did get rid of the ports of Auckland, and I'm sure the ports, when all this COVID dies down, things will start coming right again. We will get money back into to the Auckland region again, and there's money that we really did rely on. And if we sell it, it's like, I can remember Sir Barry Curtis used to say, you know, the airport shares and the ports of Auckland's really like printing money. It's a good thing, and I mean at the moment, yes, we have got a problem. And just one other thing, I'm pleased that Councillor Watson mentioned Councillor Quicks, because just the other evening I did say around this table that Councillor Quicks' name is mentioned very often, and I think into the future it will be mentioned. Just one other thing is that I think that when we amalgamated and we came to the Auckland Council from all of our other councils, we all had all of our legacy projects, and a lot of those have been done, but maybe at the detriment of our pipes and our drains and the things that really, really matter. And I think for most Aucklanders, you know, we all like libraries and swimming pools and the likes, but for most Aucklanders, we want to make sure we've got drinking water, we can flush our toilets, we can drive on our roads, and all the core, you know, all the core businesses there. And I think we may have to really look at what we, you know, I'm pleased that we're going to be probably having to look at this long term annually, and there might be some projects that just might not be able to happen straight away, because we have got some things that are probably more urgent than some of the feel-good things. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Look, with no further... Oh, sorry. Yes.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I think it's probably important just to reflect on the year that's gone. I don't think any of the councillors just heavily reflected. The Mayor may have in his opening speech, but this year we've lost the revenue, 450 million projected, with a cumulative total of $1 billion over the next 3 years. We've had the worst drought in Auckland's history, and we were forced to respond with that 220 million that we had to find to get the treatment and the supply to us. We had the city rail link of $1 billion, and our Auckland ratepayers had to come up with, in 11 days, $500 million. And, you know, we've obviously had the effect on staff. We've also got the water rates that will come through, not part of this decision making, but there will be implications in terms of price on water and wastewater costs. So, you know, whether 5% is a step too far, I don't know. You know, is 8% a step too far? I don't know. But we are going out in consultation, and we will get that feedback, which I know we'll take seriously and digest. So I'd like to reflect kind of a year ahead too with the annual plan process, just picking up on some earlier comments as well. That's where the rubber really hits the road in terms of what we're actually going to spend that money on in deliverables. I sense a strong feeling around the table that infrastructure is key, getting renewals is key. And from my point of view, the discussion to inform that annual plan around what is core business, because we might have to make some very tough decisions about the nice to haves versus the needs to have. And I think that's important exercise for us to go through as a group. So I think that's all all the messaging I'd like to have, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and you know, the collective effort of the council group in this exercise. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I just want to end the debate then by saying, look, thank you first to the IMSB for your input. It is unique, and we appreciate that. Thank you to local boards. It's been challenging, more challenging than I think this time for them, because in the emergency budget, they didn't have their work streams up and operating, so it's been more challenging for them. And to you and my fellow colleagues around the table, the way we have debated. Look, there are people who wanted ideas that didn't come to the table, and I'm one of them, because they didn't have majority of support. There are people who wanted a higher rates rise, and there are people who thought the 5% was too challenging. But at the end of the day, where the Mayor has come to is a point of, dare I say, compromise. It is the middle ground between the debate that has happened around this table. I want to thank the finance staff who have worked, as a number of you have said, well into the night and very early in the morning to get material that has changed. As we have debated, it has changed and they have come back with new material. This is a very much of a moving feast. This is not a normal LTP in any way, shape or form. There will be LTP amendments. I absolutely say that now, and I will say that, and I've said that in the workshops, and I will keep saying that. But legally, we have to strike a point to go out for consultation. And no, look, I don't agree with everything, Your Worship, necessarily. I think there needs to be some alternatives, and we're going to discuss that in the next item. But this is step 2 in a 5-step process. The first step was for us to discuss it, and we've done that. Step 2 is to go out for consultation. But there are 2 parts to that. It's the mayoral proposal, and the second piece is the next item on the agenda, other points to be consulted on as well. But the big piece of work is the actual consultation document. Because if we don't get that right, if we don't put the context and background to what we are proposing, Aucklanders will not understand what we have to do, are trying to do, or the theory behind what the mayoral proposal has said. Then, of course, you get the report back, which is step 4, and finally, you have the decision making. I want to foreshadow in this debate, and you know that, Your Worship, on the water quality targeted rate, there are no changes through the 10 years on that in your proposal, and I have foreshadowed as we have, that was one of the only things I think we've had collective decision making to look at that, and we'll do that in the next item. But again, this is only stage 2. It is only out for consultation. The most important part of it is to listen to what Aucklanders have to say. So we have a mover in the mayor. We have a... Oh, sorry, Your Worship. All right.
Thank you.
Just costing someone $100.
I looked at my watch. Pippa has already lost the $100. Oh, Kathy has lost the $100. So I'm not making her situation worse. Maybe everybody else's if they're hungry. Look, first of all, thank you everybody around the table for your collective input and for your constructive comments. And I don't think I heard anybody that didn't speak constructively to this item. I was reflecting as I was listening to some of the discussion about why I originally went into politics, which is more than 50 years ago, and it was because I wanted to change the world. And I've got to tell you, I still want to change the world. What I've learned is that I thought you could do it tomorrow. In my maiden speech in Parliament, you know, I thought, these old buggers here, they're just holding things up, we can change. I still want to change the world. It's just going to take me a little bit longer than I originally thought, which was tomorrow. And Madam Chair, you're right with, I think you raised the question of compromise. This is a compromise, this document. It's a compromise for what maybe I ideally wanted and what I thought there was a consensus for around the table, and conscious of the fact that we all govern by consent. In the end, we make the decisions, we show the leadership, but if people don't follow and they don't support, then we cease to be in the position of privilege that we are. So I've tried to find a document that I think shows leadership, that takes us in the direction that we want to go. A couple of councillors, Councillor Newman, I think, and Councillor Hills both said it's a start, but we need to go further. I absolutely accept that. We do need to go further. But is this a document that takes us in the right direction and makes some important changes for the better, for a better Auckland, for a world-class Auckland? Yes. I just want to remind everybody around the table is that I get a lot of demands for you should put this in, you should spend more on this, and you should spend more on that. And I'm conscious of the fact that you can only do those things if you raise the revenue to fund it. So, John, you know, in my proposal I talked before about the Orewa seawall and the Scotts Point Sports Centre. Okay, I think those are good projects. You think they're good projects, they're necessary projects. But if you don't get the funding and don't get the revenue to provide for those, then they don't happen. Greg, likewise. I think you've been the most consistent lobbyist for more road sealing of any colleague around the table. And yeah, maybe we can make some progress on that, but we can't if it's the status quo, because we've lost that $1 billion that you so eloquently referred to. So you want those sort of things, and I want those sort of things, then we've got to pay for them. I don't want to be around this table, and you don't want to be around this table to sit here and say we can't do any bloody thing. The world's such a tough place. It's such a bad luck that we've had COVID-19. Therefore, we're not going anywhere, not doing anything, but we'll take a really safe process. Now, I did reflect on a couple of you who so kindly said that this was a brave proposal. And I'm part of a generation that grew up under Yes Minister. And when your civil servants said, very courageous Minister, you knew what they really meant was, well, thanks Minister, we'll be seeing you go very shortly. Well, I think you do need to show a bit of courage in this. And you know, while reflecting on the fact that you're governing with consent. So I think we do need to show that leadership. Councillor Sharon Stewart, thanks for reminding us about the airport. A number of councils flogged off the airport, including the North Shore, years and years ago. Other councils were wiser, thought longer term, and held on to them. We flogged them off, they're gone. There's no revenue from those shares now. Might have helped temporarily, but once you flog a major strategic asset off, it's gone forever. And, you know, I am conscious of the fact that the 110 million dividends that we were regularly getting from the airport and the port not only gave us that money for OPEX, but they also enabled us to leverage a whole lot more so we could do a whole lot more. And to me, the airport and the port, the airport in particular, that is your rainy day fund. I think Councillor Newman, you mentioned that you're a bit worried about the 290% and whether we had any leeway there. And the leeway we have got, if things really did turn to custard and we had another lockdown at level 4, what would you have to do? That's when you use your rainy day fund. That's not rainy day, that's an absolute deluge. And we're not there yet. We can do it. We can do this without flogging off assets that are critical for us in terms of income, but also critical as that rainy day fund in your worst case scenario. So thank you for reminding me of that, Councillor Stewart. Manukau and some other councils were quite long-sighted in what they did there. I think I'll pick up the point that Councillor Coombe made, among others, that this is a starting point and there's more to do, and I absolutely believe that. You know, we could beat ourselves up for not achieving everything we wanted tomorrow, but what we've got to ask ourselves, does this document, in all of the circumstances we find ourselves, take us forward to achieve what we want to do? And climate change is one of those big things. And acknowledge, you know, Councillor Hills and Councillor Coombs and so many of the rest of you around the table actually that pushed hard on that. And I am proud that we kept it in the emergency budget, Madam Chair, and we not only kept it in the emergency budget to reduce our carbon footprint as a council, but we're also doing a bit more than the business as usual to make a difference and getting those diesel buses off the road. You know, we were leading when we agreed to do it by 2025 in the C40 countries. I was one of 12 mayors that formed the group in the C40 and said, we're going to lead the way, we'll do it by 2025. Let's do it by next year when we pass this budget. Let's make that statement, because it's an important statement to make, and it makes all the difference for health, for pollution, and for climate change. So one other thing I need to say, there was a headline somewhere I read about we were flogging off playgrounds and toilets. Thank you for Councillor Cooper for reminding us actually there isn't a great market out there for used toilets. We wouldn't get anything for it. And actually I haven't heard a single word around this table or from officials that we're about to flog off playgrounds or toilets. So let's not invent things that aren't going to happen. And that's not going to happen, never was going to happen. And, you know, yeah, I won't say any more about that. So, councillors, look, I haven't covered all of your points, I'm sorry, just don't have the ability. Oh, one other thing I was going to say, assets. I think Councillor Walker, you raised the point about the sale of assets. Actually, the value of our assets since the last long-term budget has gone up from 51 million to 56 billion. Sorry, let me get this absolutely right. From 51 billion to 56 billion. We're not diminishing our assets. We're building them. We're building them all the time because we want to deliver things to our public. But when you add the value of the asset, you also add the cost of the maintenance and the operation of that asset. And where we've got surplus stuff, you know, stuff that's property, and congratulations to all the councillors around this table that have voted to dispose of the property that we no longer have a use for, of course you sell it, because you sell it to reinvest into something better. So, councillors, there will be some changes in this, and I acknowledge the recommendation that will be moved by the chair in regard to the water quality targeted rate. Understand absolutely that it's not a big cost, $3.30 a year, I think, councillor, and I acknowledge the need to do more on the Manukau and more for Hobson Bay. I brought in the water quality targeted rate, or proposed it. You brought it in. I proposed it because we needed to do a whole lot more in that area, and I think we can without breaking the bank. I have tried to find a balance between being reasonable to our ratepayers and getting on and doing the things that make our city a great place to be. So I commend this document to you to put out for consultation.
Right, we have a mover and a seconder, the Worship and the Deputy Mayor. Your Worship and Deputy Mayor, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I was trying to catch your eye. I didn't want to put you through the stress of putting everyone through a division, but I just would like you to note that I do not support D.
Noted. Thank you, councillor.
Thank you.
Right, councillors, we'll have a quick break for lunch, half an hour, and we'll come back for item 11. Thank you.
Damn, I just thought I had some lunch.